everyone. I'm Irma Baker. Welcome to our show. We are, well, I'd have to say halfway through what is turning out to be just a fascinating story of someone who lives in our area, but started out during World War II in Europe, specifically in the middle of the war, in a village in Yugoslavia, and had to just basically find a new place to live, a new home, everything. And I hope you will check back on parts 1 and 2 if you haven't seen them. And now we're on to part 3, and there will be a part 4. It's just a fascinating story, Fritz. So wonderful to have you back with us.
Nice to be back. Thank
well,
you. Yeah.
This is Fritz Kungl. Mm-hmm. And today we are going to be talking about just what conditions were. It's after World War II, but that didn't mean life was easy. So today you're going to tell us about what it was like for 5 years in an Austrian camp.
Right. But before we go into that, one of the questions that I've been asking myself for the last probably I'm 70, 75 years. Why are we still here? We survived the first night that we talked about. We weren't shot when we lined up to be shot. The transportation to cross the river into Hungary didn't show up. The young man that we finally found, if we wouldn't have found him, we would probably still be in a camp, in our concentration camp in Yugoslavia, in Croatia. So how did we make it? Why am I still here? 2 million died, and I'm here. Why? What happened? The concentration camps were already there, but we didn't know it. But somehow we survived. And now, of course, we are at the last stage in Croatia. My parents, my sister, well, I shouldn't say parents, just my mother, and my sister went to work, and they promised that after the harvesting is done, we go back to our village. And before we do that, I want to make one other thing clear. The transportation way, when I talk about trains, they were not passenger trains. They were cattle car trains, with huge doors. So they did as they promised. They did put us on a train, and they said that we are going to go back to our village. And as far as we were concerned, that's what happened. Unfortunately, after I don't know how long, the train stopped, the doors opened, our village, we could see the village, but we were not allowed to get off the train. And some of the people that tried to give us some food, they were not allowed to approach the train. So I would say probably after about 15 minutes, half an hour, the doors closed and we were off, not knowing where we were going to go. Probably a few hours or maybe a day later, we wound up in another camp, but that camp was already in Austria, so there was no longer a concentration camp. I think it was like a collective camp, because the people that came back from Yugoslavia like we did, and the people that wanted to go to Yugoslavia, they were in that camp. A friend and distant relative from our village lived in an old castle nearby. I don't know how she found out that we were in that camp, but she took us out of that camp after, I think, only a day or so. How she found out and I don't know how they communicated at that time, because we couldn't do anything. We lived with that family in that castle. Of course, she still had to hide us.
Okay, I have to stop right here and ask you. I don't think we're talking about a castle like a palace with all kinds of wonderful furniture and great chefs and anything like that.
No, yes, this is actually a good one. So we lived with that family for about, I would say maybe a couple of months, maybe not that long, I don't know. And then, of course, after that, they said, well, I can't hide you any longer. I can't keep you. You have to leave. Because we didn't know what's going to happen next, so we had to find something. I found out later after we came to Akron, now this is years later, from one of our sons, that after we left, that castle burned. That castle burned down. It was an old castle. It burned down, and they wound up in that camp that we left. So which was kind of unusual, but I just found that out about a year ago. We got together again. But anyway, so now we don't know where to go. The only place that we knew was back to the farm that we left to go back to Yugoslavia. Now we are back, the only place that we knew. So we went back to that farm again. And that farm, we got in touch with our dad, who was a prisoner by the English. Here again, we don't know how my mom found out where he was, but she went to visit him one time, and the second time he came with her. And of course, the first question was, how did you get out of the prison camp? He said, the English didn't care. I just walked out and kept on walking. So that's how he got, and from that point on, my dad was with us. It seemed like being on that farm, everything would be just great. We would start working, and eventually we would probably be at least accepted by the Austrian people and would be all right. Well, that did not happen, because there was a disagreement between my uncle, one of my uncles, who was there at the farm with us, and the foreman of that farm, and the relationship was not too great anymore. So in the spring of 1946, and here again, I don't know how they found out about that camp about 50 miles north. I don't know how they found out. But anyway, we decided that that's where we have to go, because we don't know where else to go. We knew, apparently they did know, I didn't, that the people lived in those camps, okay? So I think it was a wagon that we had, and we took off and we went to that camp. And
Let me ask you, when you were at that farm and working on that farm, what kind of work did your family do?
It was farming. It was whatever they needed. I should say that prior to the Second World War, that farm belonged to a baron. He lost it during the war because at that time the Russians were there. Or the other difference was that when we left to go back to Yugoslavia, the Russians were there. When we came back to the same place, the English military was there. So that was a big change. So that was a good change, yeah. Yeah, and we farmed, and I'm sure we got paid some of it. I don't know, because I didn't work. They worked. I didn't. I don't know what I did. Nothing, probably.
Well, how old were you at that time?
Probably 12 years old, yeah, 12 years old. Maybe not even, no, I don't think it was 13 in 46. Born in 34, 12 years old, yeah. So we got to that camp. Okay, now I would like to make the distinction here when I say camps, and I got to be careful. The camps in Croatia, or in Yugoslavia at that time, were concentration camps. In Austria, there were places for us to live in. So we get to that camp. Okay, now we're in the camp, and the camp was crowded. I tried to find out the size of the room, but I never could. But in some rooms, there was as many as 20 people in one room. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, it was 2 or 3 families. Now, we were lucky again, because in our family there were 7, and in one of my uncle's family were 7. So we were only 14 in one room. So
you're saying only 14 people, and you're talking 2 or 3 generations of people making up those numbers.
Well, I don't know if it was, two generations anyway, yeah. So we are in that camp. Camp living for children was not bad, because we had no responsibility. All we did was play. We played a lot of chess, we played a lot of ping pong, we did everything that we could. We made up games because there was nothing else to do. So we actually had fun. It was not that great if you look at it, because there's still shortage of food. We're still hungry. Matter of fact, my brother and I, we were undernourished most of the time when we lived there. But it still was, you know, it was a lot better than we had thus far. So, yeah. The first impression that I had when we stopped at that camp, there was still some snow, and that's how I know it was late winter or early spring, because there was still snow on the ground. There were mounds in the back of the camp. I could see mounds, and why would it looked like mole mounds? Found out later on that the mounds were peas that the people couldn't eat it because it was infected with maggots. So even as hungry as they were, they still couldn't eat it, so they dumped those, and that's where the mounds were from. That's the first impression. So that's usually what you remember. Camp life, regular routine. We were on a camp kitchen. Food was scarce. We did get some, but there was no salt, there was no grease. I mean, everything was just bland. I mean, it was, yeah. But we survived. I mean, we had enough. As years went on, or time went on, things got better. My uncle that stayed with us in that one room, they left for another camp. So there were only 7 of us in that one room. And like I said, as things got better, people moved out or moved away to another place, another camp. At least my uncle did. I don't know what the others did. But there were less and less people in that camp.
So let me ask you this. How much freedom did the people in those camps have? Now, they're camps that I think somewhere you said that they were camps where the military had been stationed at one time. But it seems like finally things are opening up a little bit and people have some choice in where they are or where they could go.
Yeah, as far as restrictions, there weren't any. I mean, we lived in that camp. The Red Cross was very much involved. They would supply us with some food and mostly clothing, because prior to that we didn't have much. So we did get some shoes, and we did get some, you know, whatever, shirts and stuff like that. So the Red Cross was a big help. They did help. But the routine for us children, again, we actually were in 2 kitchens. The children were in one camp kitchen, and the grown-ups were in other one. We as children supposedly got better food. Routine. You get up in the morning. There was a building outside the camp across the street, which we used as our playhouse. I mean, there were a bunch of rooms. The first thing that we did when we got there, we got fish oil. Now this is raw. I mean, if you ever had raw fish oil, you remember it all your life, because it's horrible. But supposedly, it was something that we had to do to keep us alive. That was one thing. The other thing was we had to open our pants and our back or whatever, and DDT. They would pump it in the back, and they pump it in the front, and they pump it in the, you know, in the head, on the head, you know, because we had head lice. I mean, there was nothing unusual over there. We all had it. So, yeah, but that was the next thing, you know. So, yeah, and that was a daily routine. And then, of course, we did go and get the food, and we had long tables with the kids on there, and yeah. Did we have any schooling? I remember that we had some geography, and we had some arithmetic, but we had to memorize it because we didn't have any papers to write it on. So we, you know, we just had whatever we had to memorize it. After I went a few years in that camp, in the camp school, if that's what you want to call it, I turned 14 or 16, 14. Yeah, 14, and the teacher said, that's it. No more school for you because you're out. You're 14, that's when we quit. But he says, you're not too bad of a student. Why don't you try and go to the Austrian school? I said, well, okay, I didn't know too much about it. Why not? I tried. I mean, that's best thing to do, that's what I'm going to do, because I wanted, especially my mom, she wanted education for her kids. So yeah, do you go. So there were three of us. Two of the older boys started in the 8th grade, and I started in the 7th. English was a required course, but they took English already in the 5th grade, and I started in the 7th, so I'm already 2 years behind. Yeah, but I had to take it. And I'll never forget the English teacher, and I would come in, and she looked at me and she says, table. I said, okay. Window. I didn't know what she was talking about. I didn't know any English. I didn't know any, I don't know why she did it, but I suppose she had to go through it. So she named a few words and I said, okay, you know, whatever. But so I took an oral test and I passed it, and I started out the 7th grade. And life was great. I'm now 14 years, 15 years, and I was going to be a salesman. Over there you had to go to school. It usually was 5 days of work and 1 year school. All the trades, whether you want to be a plumber or a bricklayer or whatever, you had to go, you know, 5 days to work, and the 6th day was school. So that's it. I was going to be a salesman. And the only reason why I was actually hired into that position is because my oldest sister worked for the boss, and my one aunt was a seamstress. They had a big store. All of it was included. You could buy shoes or groceries or whatever. It was one of the biggest stores around. So I think the only reason I was hired into that position is because of my sister and my aunt, because they loved them. So they figured they would hire me. And I was in there. I was in there, and okay, now I'm probably going to stay there and probably get married to an Austrian girl, and I'll be in great shape.
Didn't work out that way, did it?
Did not work out that way. No, no, it didn't work out. It didn't work out at all. But I should go back. Some of the things that happened in the camp that we never, sports. Everybody liked sports, and at that time, like all of Europe, play soccer. Okay, but soccer was not a word. Nobody knew. It was not there. I mean, we call it foosball, or if you want to put it, football. You know. We didn't have any. I mean, we had nothing. We made. I know one of the guys had a tube from a soccer ball, and the parents put some cloth around it, and we put anything just to play with. So this one guy come up and he says, "Yeah, I have relatives in America, you know, and America has got everything. I'm going to write to my aunt to send us a football, in German, Fußball." I said, "Well, that's great." So a few weeks later, the package came, we opened it up, and we looked at that thing. It was an American football. And we looked at that and said, well, the Americans, they're either real good or they're not too smart. How can you play with that thing, you know? So that was a big disappointment, because we were looking for a foosball, like I said at that time, soccer. I don't know where they got the word soccer from. But anyway, that was one of the things that happened in that camp. The other thing, every year, they would take us for a couple of weeks out to a lake, like a vacation. And we got better food. We slept in tents, which was all right. For children, it was all right. I mean, we had no responsibilities. We had, you know, I mean, we were free. I mean, that's it. I mean, we every so often went and stole some apples from the farmer, the Austrian farmer. If they caught us, a few slaps on the back, and that's it. I mean, no police, no, it just wasn't done. I mean, you know, parents didn't complain, the farmer didn't complain, and we didn't complain, because as soon as they let us go, we'd probably turn around and go back and steal again. But we didn't call it stealing.
And this is all so different from when you were actually displaced from your village and the various other places that you tried to live at the end of the war and immediately afterward, when you had to beg for food and when you had only the clothes on your back.
Right. Now this, as far as the camp living was concerned, that was great. I mean, it was so much better than everything else thus far after we were displaced, in 44. Yeah, I mean, and after a while, my dad started work in the camp. He worked as a lumberjack, as far as I know. And yeah, I don't know if he got paid or whatever, but they started to work. I mean, life was going to be, we didn't know how long, but it got better as time went on. The English were great. I mean, matter of fact, I was a good ping pong player. And they would actually take me in the Jeep from one place to another and take me, yeah. So I mean, it's hard to understand, even for me, to say that camp living was great, but it was, especially for us kids. I don't know how my mom felt, but for us kids it was great. Yeah, we had not hot and cold running water, but we had cold water. There was a separate barrack off to the side. They had actually, once a week, we were allowed to take a shower. If you're lucky to be the first one, you actually had some hot water. But if you were in the last, which we children usually were on the end because we didn't have time to go there, at least we didn't take the time, so usually there was no hot water. And most of the time, we didn't take the bath or the shower, whatever, because we just walked and walked back again. But we could have had it. I mean, there was, yeah. We didn't have much in that room. The only thing that was in there were the beds and a pot-belly stove, because we didn't have to, or didn't have anything to cook, especially when we first got to the camp, because everything was from the camp kitchen. Later on, as years went on, and I think in 1947, 48, the Austrian government took the camp over. So we were actually on food stamps, the same food stamps that the Austrian people got. So we got the same food stamps. So we could actually go outside of the camp to buy food, which we did. And then whatever mom could cook in that pot-belly stove, that was about it. So yeah, and after a while, things got great. Okay, now I worked as a salesman, like I said, and I was going to be a salesman, and then we found out that people can leave the camp and go to various countries. One of them was Australia, and I have relatives over there. One of them was Brazil, I have relatives over there. And the other one was France, even they took a few of them. And then we found out that America would take some immigrants, some displaced persons.
By this time, you're still a teenager. I mean, you talk about being a salesman and that, but you're a teenager, and as rough as the living conditions were in this camp, they were such a tremendous improvement over what you had had before.
Oh yeah, I mean, and the pleasant thing is about the whole thing, you forget the bad thing real fast. I mean, all of a sudden we were in that camp. I mean, like I said, we looked at it as a great life. There was not, you forget, especially as a child, I mean, the bad things, and of course, we have forgotten it for the longest time. And of course, now that I'm writing about it and talk about it, it brings back some memories that I don't want to remember. But yeah, I mean, life was great. Well, okay, now we find out that America is going to accept displaced people and the camp people. The only thing that we had to have is a sponsor. Many of the camp people actually had relatives in America. And I don't know why or how come, but there were 5 families in Akron from our village that came over in 1907. But we didn't know that until we come over here, which is another story. But they were here, but we had no contact with them. Yeah, but why they came over here, I don't know. But, and especially from a small village like ours, 5 families over here in Akron. The Kungl family, great uncle of mine, was here. my dad's aunt was here, but we didn't know that. I mean, not at that time, anyway. So now now we already had applied for the the paperwork to immigrate to the States. So I quit my job. I went because I wanted to make more money, you know, because so I worked as a helper in a bricklaying thing. I worked, you know. Now I'm almost, I guess, 16 years old, and I want to make a little bit more money. So I quit a sales job, and I worked as a bricklayer.
And pretty soon,
Yeah.
very soon, your life was going to be completely turned around because you'll be able to go to America.
Yes.
And that is where we're going to pick it up next time. I hope that you will be able to join us. It's such a pleasure having Fritz with us. We will be back with his story of coming to the U.S. Thank you so much for watching.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.